Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. We begin by seeing some helicopters heading to an oil refinery that has been the target of terrorist attacks, and they are going for a rescue mission. Inside the aircraft, the operation commander Luo is present, along with a group of soldiers known as the Shadow Squadron. Upon arriving, they are received by the facility's director named Chang, who takes them inside. She explains that the terrorists have surrounded them for 2 weeks, attempting to take over the refinery. Chang mentions that they have been attacked every 2 days and emphasizes that they won't be able to hold on during the next attack. Luo asks how many people need to be evacuated, and Chang says it's 498, including their families. In another location, we see Chris playing golf when suddenly a car arrives, and a man named Henry, Chris's brother, steps out, bringing money for him. Accompanied by armed companions, Henry pays Chris for a service but also offers him another dangerous job to capture an international criminal from the death zone and transport her to the green area for transfer. Knowing the risks involved, Chris declines his brother's offer. Back in his small town, Chris plays with a child when Owen arrives in a car. Owen tells Chris that the water supply to their town has been shut off, and he suggests talking to the company Unicorp, but they may demand $100,000 for restoring the water. Chris pleads with Owen to do what he can to help the town, as they will all die of thirst otherwise. Back to Luo and his team, he orders them to prepare 2 evacuation groups, one for the next morning and another in the afternoon. Luo discovers that the best route to the green zone is dangerous, as other routes are controlled by terrorists. To avoid confrontation, he decides to take the death highway, which worries his comrades. The next morning, the refinery's system is shut down, and Cheng writes a code in her notebook and gives it to a woman named Mei. The evacuation begins with people boarding buses and helicopters. A soldier tells Cheng and her assistant to go together, while Mei travels on another bus with Commander Luo. Meanwhile, an unnoticed man marks a bus with an X and leaves the area. As everyone leaves the refinery, they count the number of buses that depart. Luo and his team reach the beginning of the Death Highway, a place filled with destroyed cars. They start crossing it, but further ahead, cars block the road. Luo doesn't stop and breaks through the barrier, but they trigger mines on the side of the road, causing large explosions. Luckily, the group passes safely, ignoring the pleas for help from young people, as Luo knows it's just a trap set by rebels to capture them. During the journey, we find out that Mei is actually Luo's daughter, and he decided to rescue everyone there because he saw her name on the list. However, Mei is not grateful, as he was not there for her and her mother when they needed him. Luo justifies that he was on a mission for his country. Mei, who was still a child at the time, doesn't forgive him for leaving her when she needed him the most, especially when her mother died. Suddenly, they are alerted to the danger ahead, a massive sandstorm. They lose communication with the other buses, and nearby, a group of men approaches the transports, specifically the one marked with an X. The experienced group manages to connect with the bus, and after boarding it, they overpower the soldiers present. Moments later, when Luo stops, he and part of his group disembark to check if everything is alright, but they realize that some buses have deviated from the route. In another location, we see one of the buses in a desert area, and the people are taken blindfolded. It is soon revealed that Chris and his brother orchestrated this. With communication restored, Luo calls for 2 helicopters for reinforcement, and he and his daughter board one of them to search for the lost buses. Ahead, they discover that the sandstorm is actually artificial, caused by a jet propulsor. Luo continues and eventually finds one of the buses, where a soldier informs him that they were ambushed by American mercenaries. Luo instructs the soldier to return to the convoy. Meanwhile, one of the helicopters finds the group of mercenaries transporting some people. The soldier opens fire, managing to destroy one of the lead cars, causing Chris to stop and try to destroy the aircraft. Henry decides to go ahead and lead the people to their destination. The mercenaries, however, successfully bring down the helicopter, eliminating the threat for them. Moments later, they arrive at the designated location. Back with Commander Luo, he finds the other bus and discovers the remaining people inside, realizing that 5 of them have been taken. On the other hand, Chris questions his brother about who hired them for the job and discovers that Owen is behind it. For some reason, Owen wanted Chang and some of her assistants there, and he warns Chris that the renowned commander Luo is leading a well-trained team to rescue Dr. Chang. Owen asks Chris to distract Luo for a while, but Chris only wants to get paid for the job already done. Owen, however, insists that the job is not yet complete. Chris ends the partnership and tells his brother to get out too before leaving the area. His desperate brother stays behind, eager for the money, and asks for a chance to finish the job. Owen, however, accuses him of failing and shoots him dead along with his team, leaving only Owen's supporters. Back in Luo's helicopter, he sees Chris heading back to the village, but instead of shooting him, Luo decides to follow him. He lands and confronts Chris alone. As children want to continue playing, Luo witnesses the scene and decides not to engage in a fight, walking away. Chris, worried about his brother not returning, decides to search for him, and unknown to him, Luo follows closely behind. Chris arrives at his brother's hideout and finds him along with his team dead, as if they were ambushed. Luo arrives shortly after and enters the area cautiously but is surprised when Chris attacks him, initiating a skilled knife fight. Luo questions why Chris was in the desert, while Chris asks why Luo was following him. The intense battle continues, with Luo dodging Chris's powerful blows, but being smaller, he eventually loses strength. While grappling, Luo asks if Chris killed his people, but Chris denies it. The fight goes on, and Luo skillfully avoids Chris's attacks, saving his brother's body from being crushed. Chris approaches and tells Luo that terrorists killed his people and his brother. Suddenly, armed men arrive seeking payment for the weapons, causing a grenade explosion that scares the men. In response, they start shooting at Chris and Luo. Both are caught in the crossfire and realize their guns are empty, so they use grenades against the enemies. Fortunately, the explosion scares the men away, but Chris's truck is destroyed. Luo suggests destroying the weapons, so they prepare a detonation and obliterate the area. Chris reveals that Owen, an ally of Unicorp, is the man Luo is looking for. At the refinery, Owen is unable to access the server due to quantum encryption, preventing him from obtaining the wealth he desires. Owen questions Chang to give him the code, but she explains that the access process is complicated. In frustration, Owen kills one of the employees. Frightened, Chang mentions that she has a paper with the codes written on it. Owen asks where it is, but to hasten the response, he kills another employee, but she still doesn't reveal its location. However, the next hostage to be killed is his son, so with no choice, she reveals where it is, and her son instructs them to track the cell phone in May's bag. Soon, we see May with the others in the village, and some children who like Chris. May receives a call, but no one speaks, and she and her father Luo don't suspect anything. Meanwhile, the people arrive at the green zone. Luo participates in the fun and cheers up the children along with Chris, as he has been there for years to help the people. Later, they talk, and Chris explains how he ended up there, having previously worked with his father in a private security company. One day, a job came up for them on the highway of death, and Chris persuaded his father to accept it, but unfortunately, they were ambushed, and in the shootout, Chris saw his father die because he gave the wrong exit signal. He distanced himself from everything and ended up staying there, where he helps the families in that village. Suddenly, they sense the presence of enemies approaching, so they tell the children to hide. Chris and Luo separate and stealthily approach and eliminate their opponents. Chris arrives to help Luo and manages to knock down all the enemies from the roof. The two continue stealthily and eliminate another terrorist. Chris, however, is not good at communicating silently and almost gets killed, but Luo saves him. The two separate again, and Luo takes down one more and then knocks out another, but without realizing that he's about to be attacked, Chris helps him from the top of a tower. However, he is spotted, and a missile is launched against the tower he's on. Chris narrowly escapes and goes to May to take her cell phone, as he suspects something. Before they capture Luo, Chris appears and asks the terrorists if they were looking for the cell phone. Suddenly, the villagers surround the enemies, but they say they only want the bag. Chris quickly enters and takes May's bag, then hands it to the terrorists so they can leave. The next morning, May reveals that the bag contains the USB key and password to activate the oil flow, which is equivalent to millions of barrels. They question how they could transport so many barrels, and May explains that it comes from the pipelines that run throughout the country, making it easier to transport the oil to waiting ships. The two then decide to go to the refinery, but May wishes to go along, although Luo does not permit it, as it will be dangerous. They take a truck and head to the location, while May finds a car available. At the refinery, with possession of the key and password, Owen orders Chang to restart the system, and under threat, she complies. The oil begins to flow and reaches the ship, but it will take 24 hours to fill everything. Chris and Luo, in the truck, approach the refinery, and fearlessly dodging shots and a missile, they break through the concrete barriers. After invading the place and attracting attention, they leave the truck and separate once again. Inside the control room, Owen breaks the USB key to prevent the process from being interrupted, then leaves, instructing the soldier to kill everyone once the ship is full. Meanwhile, Luo faces his armed enemies with blades, and Chris does the same. Taking advantage of his strength, Chris easily overpowers them and, using a pipe, helps Luo, who almost falls from the top of the pipelines. Luo faces his opponents and uses his acrobatics to defeat them. Chris joins him, and they climb to where Chang and her son are. Chris knocks down two of the terrorists and dodges the bullets of another. Luo arrives and attacks an enemy with a blade, but the man dodges and, using a hydraulic hose, Chris hits him and gets close enough to fight him hand-to-hand. The hostages leave the area while the two face the excellent fighter. The man evades their attacks, grabs his gun, and begins his attack, but without bullets. Chris notices and tells Luo to surprise him while he distracts him. The plan works. Luo grabs his opponent and throws him against the glass of the room. He tells Chris to go after Owen, but Chris, not having enough speed, can't reach the enemy cars. Fortunately, May comes with her car, which she calls Susie. Chris wastes no time and asks her to follow the enemy convoy. Meanwhile, Luo faces his final opponent alone. He prevents him from leaving, spraying fire-extinguishing foam on him, but accidentally breaks the pump and spreads foam all over the place. With the support of a hook and springs, he launches himself at his enemy and tries to defeat him, but his opponent is well prepared and throws him into the foam. The fight continues amidst all of that, and Luo manages to gain the upper hand against the terrorist. He then ties the cables around him and hurls him against the iron, ending that battle. Meanwhile, Owen lures Chris off the road, and at a certain point, they jump over a small hill. Unfortunately, Chris's car wasn't ready for this adventure and ends up flipping over, falling behind. Fortunately, Luo in a truck with a jet propeller at the back approaches them and invites them to go together. They take a shortcut to get closer to Owen faster, but the speed is not enough, so they activate the jet propeller and accelerate the truck. They quickly catch up with the trucks and surprise one of them by hitting the rear. However, Chris, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, is thrown out. The jet propeller causes havoc and causes the trucks behind to flip over and then explode. Owen's car almost gets crushed, but the destruction makes it flip over. Owen is the only surviving terrorist, and with his driver dead, he takes the wheel, and Chris, getting up, sees him driving away. The truck has a problem with some valves and can't move, but Chris quickly fixes it and activates support on the sides. They then activate the jet propeller and move towards Owen, who sees them approaching, and in the middle of the way, they reach him. The truck is heading towards an abyss. It breaks the barrier cables, and unable to stop it, Luo grabs a rope tied to Owen's car and May's belt. When the truck falls, they jump out, hanging on the edge of the abyss. Owen is badly injured and realizes they are hanging on the cable tied to his car, which is stuck on some rocks. Feeling hopeless, he accelerates the car, causing it to fall down the abyss. The rope is attached to May, so Luo quickly unties the rope, leaving the enemy to fall to his death alone. They fall to a safe area, but they are sad because apparently Chris fell along with the truck. May finds her diary in her father's pocket, which had some photos, one of them torn. Luo puts the pieces back together, restoring the photo of her family. May understands that what her father did was necessary and finally forgives him, embracing him happily and relieved that they survived. Suddenly, Chris, who is still alive, escaped from the truck and had held onto the walls of the abyss. He receives help to climb back up and stay safe. It is shown that Luo's soldiers have taken control of the ship with the stolen oil, and in the village, Luo and Chris manage to get the water well working again. The movie ends with Luo's team arriving and saying they have a new mission, and Commander Luo invites Chris, who happily accepts to participate.